The Galactic Concord had never been questioned before. For thousands of years, its word was law across the spiral arm. Species that resisted were erased. Those that obeyed survived, though barely. So when Earth's signal crackled through the deep space relay, a raw, unfiltered broadcast from a planet barely out of its atmospheric cradle, the High Council assumed it was a mistake, static perhaps, or a dying probe repeating old data. But then the message repeated, and repeated again. Clear, calm, human. General Lyle Dawson stood in the dim light of the Global Defense Chamber beneath Cheyenne Mountain. His uniform was worn at the cuffs, his eyes heavy with sleepless nights. Around him, screens showed feeds from every continent. Evacuation routes clogged, power grids flickering, families huddled in basements with radios tuned to emergency bands. Above it all, the Concord's ultimatum scrolled in cold geometric script. Surrender all off-world assets. Dismantle your orbital platforms. Submit to planetary quarantine. Comply within 72 cycles or face total sterilization. No one in the room spoke. They didn't need to. They all knew what sterilization meant. It wasn't just bombs or beams. It was the complete removal of a species from the record. Cities melted into glass, oceans boiled away, even the microbes in the soil purged by engineered plagues. It had happened before. To the Krill, to the Xanthar, to a dozen others whose names were now footnotes in alien archives. But Earth was different, not because of its weapons. Its fleet was little more than retrofitted cargo haulers and drone tugs, but because of what its people did when cornered. Lyle had seen it in the old wars, in the archives of world conflicts long past. Humans didn't just fight, they adapted. They turned scrap into shields, grief into grit, and silence into strategy. Dr. Mara Ellison entered the chamber without announcement. Her lab coat was stained with coffee, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. She carried a data slate, its screen glowing with waveform analyses. She didn't look at the general. She looked at the Concord's message. "They're not bluffing," she said. "Their language patterns show 0 deception markers. This is standard protocol for them. They've done this exact sequence 17 times before, always with the same result." 17 times, Lyle said. "And how many of those species are still around?" "None." A silence settled, not the kind of silence that meant defeat, but the kind that came before a decision. "Then we don't surrender," Lyle said. Mara turned to him. "You know what that means." "I do. It means we stop pretending we're outmatched. We stop waiting for someone else to save us, and we start fighting like humans." Outside, the sky was still blue. Birds flew over Denver. Children played in parks, unaware that their world had just been marked for deletion. But in hidden bunkers and underground labs, the real work began. Engineers tore apart old satellites for parts. Programmers wrote code that could mimic alien signal structures. Farmers in Iowa and Kansas started burying fuel tanks under barns, not for tractors, but for something far more dangerous. The Concorde expected fear. They expected groveling. What they didn't expect was organization. Within hours, every nation on Earth, despite old grudges and borders, linked into a single defense network. Old rivalries dissolved under the weight of extinction. Russia shared its deep Earth silo schematics. Brazil opened its rainforest comms relays. Even the smallest island nations contributed. Solar arrays, drone operators, encrypted messaging protocols. Meanwhile, in a quiet lab beneath the University of Arizona, Mara and her team worked on something else. Not a weapon, but a question. The Concorde communicated through a shared neural lattice, a kind of hive mind that linked every ship, every soldier, every command node. Their language wasn't just words. It was logic, pure, unemotional, mathematical. But human language was messy, full of contradictions, metaphors, emotions that couldn't be quantified. What if, Mara wondered, they could inject something the Concorde couldn't process? Not a virus, but an idea. Something so illogical it would cause a cascade failure in their system. She didn't tell anyone yet, not even Lyle, because if she was wrong, it would be just another dead end. But if she was right, it might be the only thing that could buy them time. As the first cycle ticked away, Lyle stood before the United Earth Council, a makeshift assembly of presidents, generals, scientists, and even a few school teachers who had built signal jammers in their garages. He didn't give a speech. He simply said they think we're weak because we're new. But new means we haven't learned to accept limits. We haven't been broken yet. And that's our advantage. The council voted unanimously. No surrender. No retreat. Earth would stand. By the time the second cycle began, the first alien scouts had already entered the Sol system. Sleek obsidian vessels shaped like thorns gliding past Neptune without slowing. They didn't hail. They didn't scan. They simply observed as if watching insects scurry before a boot. But down on Earth in a garage in Portland, a teenager named Jake wired a microwave emitter to a drone made from a toy helicopter and a soda can. In Houston, retired astronaut Carla Mitchell taught a group of teens how to recalibrate old satellite dishes to bounce signals off the moon. In Nairobi, a former street artist painted camouflage patterns on missile casings using recycled paint. The Concorde saw none of this. They saw only a primitive world, trembling in the shadow of their might. They didn't understand that humans didn't need permission to be dangerous. They didn't need advanced tech to be clever. All they needed was a reason to fight. And now they had one. As the third and final cycle approached, Lyle walked alone through the empty corridors of the defense bunker. He passed rooms filled with humming servers, maps glowing with red markers, and quiet voices coordinating last-minute plans. He stopped at a window, real glass, not a screen, and looked out at the mountains, snow-capped still, peaceful. He thought of his daughter, gone 10 years now, lost to a fever no medicine could cure. He thought of the world she never got to see grow up. And he made a promise, not to her but to every child who would wake up tomorrow wondering if the sky would still be there. "We're not going quietly," he whispered. And somewhere deep in the void between stars, the vanguard of the Vexari Armada powered up its primary weapons. The Concord had given its warning. Now it would deliver its judgment. But Earth was ready, not with grand fleets or planet-shattering guns, but with stubbornness, with ingenuity, with the quiet, unshakable belief that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire big enough to burn a galaxy. The first shot hadn't been fired yet, but the war had already begun. The Vexari Armada arrived not with fanfare but with silence. Their ships slid into the Sol system like knives through fog, black and smooth, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. They bypassed Mars without a glance, ignored the asteroid belt entirely, and moved straight for Earth's orbit. Within hours, the first human outposts fell. The lunar defense grid, patched together from old mining rigs and repurposed cargo drones, lasted 17 minutes. Then it was gone, reduced to floating debris and static. From the surface, people watched the sky darken, not with clouds but with ships, hundreds of them, thousands, blotting out stars, eclipsing the moon. The Concorde had not come to negotiate. They had come to erase. Yet even as cities braced for bombardment, something unexpected happened. The Vexari did not fire. They held position, hovering, waiting. Their message was clear: surrender now, and your suffering will be brief. Resist, and it will be endless. But Earth had already chosen. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, in a hidden shipyard carved into the moon's frozen crust, Captain Elena Ruiz powered up the last of humanity's real warships. It wasn't much, just a retrofitted deep mining vessel named the Iron Mule, armored with scavenged hull plates and armed with jury-rigged rail cannons. Its crew was small, 12 men and women, most of them former asteroid miners or orbital mechanics. None had ever seen real combat, but they knew how to fix things, how to improvise, how to survive. Elena stood on the bridge, her hands steady on the controls. She was lean, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried calm even in chaos. She'd lost her brother in the first orbital strike. She wasn't fighting for victory. She was fighting so his death meant something. "We're not here to win," she told her crew. "We're here to prove they can bleed." Their mission was simple: infiltrate the Vexari command vessel, the largest ship in the Armada, a monstrous spire drifting above the Pacific, and plant a data spike loaded with Mara Ellison's experimental payload. If it worked, it might disrupt the hive mind link that coordinated the entire fleet. If it failed, they'd die trying. Either way, they'd force the Concorde to notice them. The Iron Mule launched from Europa under cover of a solar flare. Its engines ran cold, its signature masked by the radiation storm. For 2 days it drifted through the void, silent and dark until it reached the edge of Earth's magnetosphere. There, it waited. Meanwhile, on the ground, resistance flared in unexpected places. In Tokyo, a group of students hacked into an old weather satellite and beamed false thermal readings toward the Vexari fleet, making it look like entire cities had been abandoned. In Buenos Aires, engineers converted subway tunnels into missile silos, loading them with modified industrial rockets tipped with shrapnel and thermite. In Alaska, a retired fisherman named Harold rigged his old trawler with radar jammers and floated it into the Bering Sea, broadcasting fake military chatter on loop. The Vexari, used to predictable enemies, struggled to interpret the noise. Their sensors showed contradictions: empty cities with power grids still active, forests emitting weapon signatures, oceans pulsing with encrypted signals. Their logic engines stuttered. For the first time, doubt crept into their flawless calculations. Then came Elena's move, under cover of a coordinated blackout across North America, engineered by overloading old power stations in a controlled cascade. The Iron Mule slipped through the orbital perimeter. It mimicked the debris signature of a destroyed satellite, tumbling slowly toward the command vessel. The Vexari sensors registered it as harmless. They were wrong. Once within range, Elena fired the mule's thrusters. The ship righted itself, and from its belly, a single stealth pod ejected, no bigger than a car, coated in heat-absorbing gel, carrying Elena and two others: Jin Park, a comms expert, and Rosa Mendez, a demolitions tech who once worked on oil rigs in the Gulf. They docked silently on the underside of the command vessel. No alarms, no patrols. The Vexari assumed nothing could reach them. They were arrogant, and arrogance was a weakness humans understood well. Inside, the ship was unlike anything they'd seen. Walls pulsed with organic circuitry, floors shifted like muscle. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic like blood. They moved fast, following pre-mapped routes based on intercepted signal patterns. Every turn was a gamble. Every second counted. They reached the core nexus, a chamber filled with glowing filaments that pulsed in unison like a heart. This was the hive link, the brain of the fleet. Rosa planted the spike. Jin synced it to the ship's main data stream. Elena stood guard, her rifle ready, though she knew it wouldn't stop a Vexari warrior if one appeared. "Upload complete," Jin whispered. They turned to leave, but as they reached the corridor, the lights changed. A low hum filled the air. The walls began to ripple. They'd been detected. "Run," Elena said. They sprinted back the way they came, the ship itself seeming to twist against them. Doors sealed. Floors tilted. Gravity fluctuated. Rosa tripped, her leg caught in a closing seam. Jin tried to pull her free, but it was too late. The floor swallowed her whole. Elena didn't stop. She couldn't. Jin followed, tears streaking his face, clutching the detonator for the mule's backup charge, set to blow if they didn't return in time. They barely made it to the pod. As they launched away, the command vessel shuddered, not from an explosion, but from within. The filaments in the core flickered erratically. For 3 seconds, the entire Vexari fleet froze. It was enough. Across Earth, hidden batteries opened fire. Kinetic rods dropped from dead satellites. Drone swarms, thousands of them, built from toy parts and scrap metal, flooded the lower orbit, jamming sensors and latching onto enemy hulls like digital parasites. The Vexari recovered quickly. Within minutes, order returned, but the damage was done. They had been touched, violated, and worse, they had been surprised. As the Iron Mule limped back toward Europa, half its systems fried, Elena looked at the feed from Earth. Smoke rose from cities, fires burned in the oceans, but people were still moving, still fighting. "They think we're animals," she said. "But animals don't build traps. Animals don't plan. Animals don't sacrifice. We just showed them what we really are." Back on the surface, Lyle Dawson received the mission report. Rosa and 3 others lost. The payload deployed. Fleet disruption confirmed for 2.8 seconds. Minimal tactical gain, heavy cost. But he smiled because, for the first time, the Concorde had flinched. And flinching meant they could be hurt. In hidden labs and underground farms, in submarines and mountain bunkers, humans kept working, not because they believed they would win, but because stopping meant letting the darkness win. And humans had never been good at accepting darkness. Above them, the Vexari Armada regrouped. Their commanders exchanged silent pulses of data, analyzing the breach, recalculating risk. They would not make the same mistake twice. But they didn't understand. The mistake wasn't tactical. It was philosophical. They had assumed humanity was like every other species, rational, self-preserving, breakable. They hadn't counted on the fact that humans would rather burn the world than kneel. And now, with blood in the water and fire in their hearts, Earth was just getting started. Earth burned, not in the way forests burn with flame and smoke that clears with rain, but in the way a memory burns, deep, lasting, changing everything it touches. Cities that once hummed with traffic and music now lay under ash and silence. The skies, once blue or gray with weather, were streaked with contrails of falling debris and the dull red glow of orbital fires. Millions were gone, not in battle but in the first hours, when the Vexari finally decided patience was wasted on primitives. They had dropped rods from orbit, tungsten spears moving at terminal velocity, punching through mountains, vaporizing towns, turning lakes to steam in an instant. They called it cleansing. Humans called it murder. But murder did not break them. In the ruins of Chicago, a group of teenagers dragged a broken satellite dish through rubble, rewiring it with copper stripped from old power lines. They weren't soldiers. One had been a barista, another a high school wrestler. Now they were signal operators bouncing encrypted messages off the moon using a code based on nursery rhymes. The Vexari couldn't crack it, not because it was complex, but because it made no sense to logic. Why would war plans hide inside Mary Had a Little Lamb? In Iowa, farmer Dale Hendricks welded steel plates onto a combine harvester, mounted a salvaged naval railgun on its back, and drove it into a cornfield-turned-missile launch zone. His wife, Linda, coordinated drone swarms from their storm cellar using a tablet powered by a car battery. They hadn't seen their children in weeks. They were with a mobile school unit in Wyoming learning how to build radio jammers from soda cans and wire. Dale didn't cry. He just kept welding, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant his kids would have no future to return to. Deep in Antarctica, Dr. Mara Ellison worked in a lab carved into glacial ice. The cold kept the servers stable. The isolation kept them hidden. Around her, walls flickered with alien script, Vexari command logs intercepted during the brief disruption caused by Elena's raid. Mara had found something. Not a weakness in armor or shields, but in thought. The Vexari mind was a network, yes, but it relied on absolute consistency. Every command, every perception, had to align with established logic, introduce a paradox, an idea that contradicted itself but was still true, and the system strained. Introduce enough and it might fracture. She tested phrases. This sentence is false. I am lying, but those were too abstract. The Vexari dismissed them as noise. Then she tried something human. I will die for someone I've never met. We fight so our enemies' children won't have to. Mercy is strength. These made no sense in a survival of the fittest galaxy. Yet humans lived by them. She bundled these concepts into a data packet, wrapped in emotional resonance frequencies, encoded in human lullabies and set to trigger on contact with any Vexari neural node. She didn't know if it would work, but it was all they had. General Lyle Dawson stood over a holographic map in the remains of the Cheyenne Mountain bunker. Half the facility was gone, collapsed under a near-miss kinetic strike. What remained was powered by geothermal taps and hope. The map showed Earth, red zones where the Vexari held orbit, green flickers where resistance still held. The greens were shrinking, but not fast enough. He had a plan. Operation Phoenix, not to win but to buy time. They would feed false data through compromised channels, make it look like the last human command center was regrouping in downtown Chicago, using the old stock exchange as a shield. In truth, the real command had moved to a submarine base under Lake Superior, but the decoy would be convincing. Fake power surges, looping comms chatter, even thermal blooms from buried heaters. The Vexari would bite. They always did. They trusted data over instinct, and data said Chicago was the heart. Captain Elena Ruiz, recovered from her mission but limping from shrapnel wounds, was assigned to lead the decoy team. She didn't argue. She packed extra ammo, kissed a photo of her brother, and boarded a stealth shuttle painted to look like a civilian transport. Her team included Jin Park, still quiet since Rosa's death, and a new recruit, Miguel Ortega, a former firefighter from San Diego who could hotwire anything with a battery. They landed in the ruins under cover of a dust storm. For 3 days, they built the illusion. Rigged servers hummed with fake traffic. Drones flew patrol patterns. Even a mannequin dressed as Lyle sat at a command console, filmed by a rotating camera to simulate movement. On the 4th day, the sky darkened. The Vexari came not with scouts, but with wrath. 3 command cruisers descended, their hulls splitting open like jaws. Plasma cannons charged. This was it, the final blow to human leadership. But as the first beam lanced down, Elena triggered the trap. Buried charges, thermite and shaped explosives, detonated beneath the streets not to destroy but to create a massive electromagnetic pulse. It fried local circuits, yes, but more importantly, it mimicked the signature of a collapsing fusion core. To the Vexari sensors, it looked like Chicago had just self-destructed in a last act of defiance. The cruisers paused, confused. Their logic demanded confirmation. In that hesitation, Elena's team vanished into the subway tunnels, heading for extraction. But the cost was high. Miguel didn't make it out. He stayed behind to manually overload a relay, buying them 30 seconds. He died smiling, whispering, "Tell my mom I fixed the toaster before the tunnel collapsed." Back at Lake Superior, Lyle received the signal. Decoy successful. Vexari fleet regrouping. Confusion detected in command channels. But then came worse news. The Concord High Council had convened. After reviewing the footage of human resistance, not just weapons but acts of sacrifice, coordination, irrational courage, they had upgraded Earth's threat level. No longer a rebellion to be crushed. Now a contagion to be contained. They authorized the use of a planet cracker, a weapon that didn't just destroy life but shattered the crust itself, rendering the world geologically dead for millennia. It would arrive in 48 hours. In the quiet that followed, no one panicked. They had expected this, feared it, prepared for it. Mara sent her final version of the Paradox payload to every surviving drone, satellite, and shuttle. Lyle ordered all remaining forces to prepare for one last push, not to stop the planet cracker, but to delay it long enough for the payload to spread through the fleet, and in basements, barns, and bunkers across the globe. Ordinary people did what they always did. They kept going. A teacher in Seattle taught math by candlelight. A nurse in Cairo stitched wounds with fishing line. A boy in Manila flew a kite made of foil and wire, not for fun but to test wind patterns for drone launches. They knew they might not see tomorrow. But if they gave up today, tomorrow would never come for anyone. As night fell over the broken continents, the stars above seemed colder, but on the ground fires still burned, not just of destruction but of defiance. And somewhere in the void, the planet cracker drifted closer, unaware that the species it was sent to erase had already decided. If they were going to die, they would take the galaxy's arrogance with them. The planet cracker hung in high orbit like a black seed waiting to bloom. It was not a ship, not truly. It was a machine built for one purpose, to drive a series of gravitic spikes into Earth's core and trigger a chain reaction that would tear the planet apart from the inside. Once activated, nothing could stop it. Not missiles, not shields, not prayers. The Concorde had used it only twice before. Both times, the target worlds vanished into asteroid belts within hours. But Earth was not waiting. As the final countdown began, every surviving human asset moved as one, not with grand formations or heroic speeches, but with quiet precision. In the shattered remains of the International Space Station, now just a tangle of metal and memory, a skeleton crew of 3 activated the last kinetic rods. They weren't aimed at the planet cracker. They were aimed at the Vexari command ships surrounding it. Distraction, not destruction. On the moon, automated factories that once built solar panels now churned out drone after drone. Tiny, fragile things with no weapons, only data transmitters. Each carried a copy of Mara Ellison's Paradox payload. Their mission was simple: get close enough to be absorbed by the Vexari fleet sensor nets, then broadcast. On Earth, Lyle Dawson stood in the command sub beneath Lake Superior. The walls dripped with condensation. The air smelled of damp metal and coffee gone cold. Around him, screens showed feeds from every corner of the globe. In Kansas, farmers launched modified weather balloons carrying signal repeaters. In Norway, former oil rig workers fired harpoons wrapped in conductive wire into low-orbit debris, creating temporary energy arcs that mimicked weapon signatures. In New Delhi, schoolchildren assembled radio kits from scavenged parts, broadcasting lullabies laced with encrypted code. The Vexari saw chaos, but it was choreographed chaos. Every action had a purpose. Every sacrifice bought seconds. Then, as the planet cracker powered up its primary array, the first wave hit, not with fire, but with silence. A single drone, no bigger than a shoebox, drifted into the outer perimeter of the Vexari fleet. It emitted a soft pulse, a human voice singing, "Hush, little baby." The Vexari sensors flagged it as non-threatening. But their neural network, ever curious, sampled it. And in that sample, the paradox bloomed. I fight so you don't have to. The phrase made no logical sense. Why would one life risk itself for another? Especially a stranger. Survival demanded self-preservation. Yet here it was, repeated in 1,000 variations across 1,000 signals. Mercy is not weakness. Hope is not foolish. Dying for others is the highest form of strength. The Vexari command node stuttered. For a fraction of a second, their shared consciousness fractured. Orders overlapped. Targeting systems misaligned. A cruiser fired on empty space. Another veered off course. It was enough. Elena Ruiz, piloting a patched-together interceptor from a hidden hangar in Greenland, saw the opening. She didn't hesitate. She led a squadron of 6, mostly volunteers with flight simulators as their only training, straight into the gap. Their ships carried no bombs, only fusion lances cobbled from old reactor cores and focused through salvaged telescope lenses. Crude, unstable, but powerful enough to punch through hull plating if aimed right. They struck the planet cracker's support ring, not the core, but the stabilizers that kept it aligned with Earth's magnetic field. One by one, the lances fired. 2 ships were vaporized instantly by point defense turrets. A third spun out, its pilot ejecting into the void. But Elena's shot hit true. The stabilizer cracked. The machine wobbled. Below, in Antarctica, Mara watched the data stream. The paradox was spreading. Not like a virus, but like a question. And the Vexari, for the first time in their history, had no answer. Their logic engines overloaded trying to reconcile human behavior with their understanding of the universe. Some ships went dark. Others turned on each other, mistaking allies for threats in their confusion. On the surface, people felt it. The sky flickered. The oppressive weight of the armada above seemed to loosen. In Tokyo, a woman stepped out of her shelter and looked up. In Cape Town, a boy stopped building a barricade and pointed. The stars were visible again, if only for a moment. Lyle gave the final order. Operation Iron Bloom. From every hidden site, every last reserve, humanity unleashed everything it had left. Kinetic rods rained from dead satellites. Drone swarms formed living shields around Elena's position. Even old nuclear warheads, decommissioned decades ago, were launched not to explode, but to emit electromagnetic bursts that scrambled targeting systems. The planet cracker tried to compensate. Its core glowed white-hot, but without stable alignment, its gravitic spikes would miss the core entirely. It would crack the crust, yes, but not shatter the planet. It would wound, not kill, and wounded, Earth could heal. As the machine shuddered and powered down, the Vexari fleet began to retreat, not in panic, but in something worse, doubt. Their flawless record was broken. Their certainty was gone, and in its place bloomed something they had never known. Fear. Elena's ship, bleeding fuel and oxygen, limped toward lunar orbit. She looked back at Earth, scarred, smoking, but still whole. Still fighting. In the command sub, Lyle received word from every continent. We're still here. We're still standing. And in Antarctica, Mara whispered to no one. They didn't just lose a battle. They lost their belief that they were invincible. Above, the stars watched, and for the first time, they saw not a primitive world, but a warning. Because the most dangerous species in the galaxy wasn't the one with the biggest guns. It was the one that refused to stop believing, even when the universe said it should. The silence after the battle was louder than the war, not because there were no sounds. Earth still groaned with fires, with collapsing buildings, with the cries of the wounded. But because the sky was empty, the Vexari armada had pulled back beyond the orbit of Mars. Their formation broken, their signals scattered. They were not gone, but they were no longer certain. And in the galaxy the Concord ruled, uncertainty was more dangerous than any weapon. On Earth, people emerged from shelters, from tunnels, from the hollowed-out shells of their homes. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply looked at the sky and breathed. Then they got to work. A woman in Detroit used a bicycle generator to power a water purifier. A man in Manila strung wires between rooftops to restore a neighborhood comms net. In the ruins of Berlin, children dug through rubble not for toys, but for usable metal to melt down and reshape. They were tired. They were grieving. But they were alive, and that was enough. Far away in the heart of the Galactic Concord, panic spread like a quiet fire. The High Council convened in their crystalline chamber, their forms shifting with agitation. Footage from Earth played on every wall, not of weapons, but of humans. A medic shielding a stranger with her body. A farmer sharing his last can of beans with a refugee. A teenager rerouting power to a hospital while bombs fell nearby. These acts made no sense in a universe governed by dominance and survival, yet they had undone the Concorde's certainty. Worse, whispers began on other worlds. The Kasari labor camps on Vega 9 saw their first coordinated strike in centuries. The drone miners of Proxima B stopped obeying commands for 3 full cycles. Even the silent monks of the Orion Vale sent a single message to Sol. You are not alone. The Concorde could not allow this. Rebellion was one thing. Hope was another. Hope was contagious, so they did what empires always do when threatened from below. They offered peace. A new transmission arrived at Earth's remaining comms hubs. Not an ultimatum this time, but a proposal. Lay down your arms. Accept oversight. Join the Concorde as a protected species. In return, reconstruction aid would be sent. Medical drones, food synthesizers, clean energy cores. All they asked was obedience. General Lyle Dawson read the message in the dim light of the Lake Superior Command sub. His face was lined with exhaustion. His uniform patched and faded. Around him his staff waited. Some wanted to accept. Not out of fear, but out of love for what remained of their world. They had lost so much. Could they risk losing it all again? But Lyle knew the truth. Protection was just another word for control. Aid was just another chain. And Earth had bled too much to trade one master for another. He called Dr. Mara Ellison. She arrived within the hour. Her eyes sharp despite the dark circles beneath them. She carried no data slate this time, just a small recorder. You know what they're really offering, he said. They're offering to let us live, she replied. As long as we stop being human. Exactly. They met with the Global Council. Not in a grand chamber, but over a crackling audio link that connected bunkers from Siberia to Patagonia. Voices came through tired but clear. A fisherman from Maine, a teacher from Nairobi, a former engineer from Jakarta. They spoke not as leaders, but as survivors. And they all said the same thing. No, not unless we are equals. Not unless we have a voice. Not unless every species the Concorde crushed gets the same chance. Mara drafted the reply. Not in legal terms, not in diplomatic code, but in plain human words. We do not want your pity. We do not want your control. We want a seat at your table. Not as subjects, but as witnesses. We saw what you did to others. We will not let you forget. The Concorde hesitated. They had expected groveling. Not terms, but they also knew they could not return to Earth. Not after what happened. Not after their fleet had faltered. Their logic had cracked and their myth of invincibility had burned in Earth's atmosphere. So they agreed. Not fully, not gracefully, but they agreed. Earth would be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Concorde, with full voting rights, with access to shared knowledge, and with one condition: humanity would never be allowed to possess planet cracker-level weapons. Lyle accepted that, not because he trusted them, but because he knew humans didn't need planet crackers to be dangerous. They only needed ideas. In the weeks that followed, alien ships returned, not to conquer, but to observe. They hovered at a distance, scanning, recording. They saw humans bury their dead with songs. They saw them rebuild schools before palaces. They saw them share scarce food with strangers. And slowly the observers began to understand. Earth was not the most advanced species, not the strongest, not the oldest, but it was the most stubborn. And in a universe that rewarded compliance, stubbornness was revolutionary. On the day the first alien envoy landed, a slender, silver-skinned diplomat named Kale, they did not arrive in a warship. They came in a vessel shaped like a seed, and they brought no soldiers. Only a data crystal containing the names of every species the Concorde had erased. Mara accepted it, not as a gift, but as a debt. Later, standing on a hill outside Denver, Lyle watched the sun set over a broken but healing world. Elena joined him, her legs still wrapped in a brace, her eyes on the horizon. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said. "We make sure no one else has to fight this fight alone." And from that hill a new signal went out. Not a threat, not a plea, just a message broadcast on every frequency in every language, human and alien alike. "Congratulations. You only declared war on the most lethal species in the galaxy, because we don't fight to win. We fight so others never have to."